Hello and welcome to Fortifying Your Network, Harnessing Microsegmentation for Enhanced Zero Trust Security. Today's webinar is sponsored by TrueFort and produced by Actual Tech Media. My name is Scott Becker. I'm from Actual Tech Media and I'm excited to be your moderator for this demo-packed presentation. Now, before we get to today's great content, we do have a few housekeeping items that will help you get the most out of this session. First off, we do want this to be an informative event for you, so we encourage any questions in the questions box in your webinar control panel. Not only will we have team members responding to questions during the live event, but we'll also have a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the presentation where we'll discuss in greater detail some of the top questions that you ask. The Q&A panel is also the place to let us know about any technical issues that you might be experiencing. A browser refresh will fix most audio, video, or slide advancement issues, but if that doesn't work, just let us know there in the Q&A and we'll provide further technical assistance. Now, in the handout section of your webinar control panel, you'll find that we're offering several resources. I'd especially like to call your attention to a TrueFort Platform Overview White Paper, a TrueFort Platform Solution Brief, and a Microsegmentation Solution Brief. You can also find some other valuable Actual Tech Media links there in the handout section, so I encourage you to review all of those resources and share them with your friends and colleagues. Now, at the end of this webinar event, we will be awarding a $250 Amazon gift card to one lucky registrant. Great way to start the weekend for somebody. So, of course, you must be in attendance during the live event to qualify for the prize. Official terms and conditions of today's prize drawing can be found in the handout section. Just scroll to the bottom and you'll find the prize terms and conditions link there. Now, finally, one of the best benefits of this event is the opportunity to ask a question of our expert presenters. So to help encourage your questions, we have a special additional prize for you. It's another Amazon gift card, this one for $50 for the best question. After the event is over, we'll look at all the questions that came in, pick out the very best one, and contact that prize winner. All right. With all that out of the way, let's get to today's democast. So it's my pleasure to introduce you to our presenter today, Samuel Schneider, who's Senior Security Engineer with TrueFort. Sam, the floor is yours.
Awesome. Thank you, Scott. I'm very happy to be here today. My name is Samuel Schneider. I'm a Senior Security Engineer with TrueFort, and I've been in the security industry for about 3 decades now. I'm a goon at DEF CON, love the security space, love what I'm doing, and love what TrueFort brings to the table as far as our microsegmentation security control products. And I'm excited to talk about what we can do and how we can help your company actually fill gaps that are currently being exposed. So without further ado, let's jump into this. So one of the big issues that we see in the security space today is that existing security tools, and this has always been the case if you think about it. I mean, in the 90s and early 2000s, we had perimeter-based security controls that sat out there. That was enough for the time, right? Then we started getting into more advanced infrastructure tools. WAFs are huge, database security, XDRs, NDR, and EDRs, right? EDR is definitely feeding into other tools, is a huge, huge upswing in control viability. Web application firewalls, though, they provide very little context when it comes to being able to actually control the flow of the data. So you have to work off very highly trained rules. It's more of a blacklisting technology, and you're looking for streams of information in the signature. So think of an old snort, right, as an example of how a web app would actually pick up information on the network and leverage that information to apply a control against it. NDRs, same type of technology, right? But it's primarily focused on that north-south traffic. So when we have lateral movement between east-west flows, that's when it becomes much more complicated. Once again, though, the majority of the next generation firewalls and NDR, so when I talk about next generation firewalls, I'm talking about application aware. So think of your Palo Altos as an example of this. They're basically looking at signatures within a captured component of a frame or a header. piece that's being picked up on the network. And what it's going to be doing is looking for very specific events. Well, think about this for a second. How does that protect you if the event's never been seen before? What's going to be the response to that? Right? At a very minimum, you're going to get a false negative response to that, and that's going to disrupt your business, and that's what we want to avoid. XDRs, they're not looking at the lateral movement, the east-west flows from a baseline perspective. In other words, they're not learning what the expected behaviors for that lateral movement is going to be. And that can be problematic when it comes to your applications. In this case, I mean, if you have semi-annual changes, or let's say, for example, Black Friday at the end of Q4, you may have changes to your presentation. You may have changes to your website. A prime example of this is you're going to have a significant uptick in flow from the outside into your web application servers. That may cause some confusion as far as your flow. And then not being able to see east-west, you're flying blind on this. So all of these tools have their own unique advantages, and I'm certainly not advocating that you not use these types of capabilities and tools. You need to do this. And as we all know in this space, security is based on layers. We need those layers, and especially the traditional layers that we've always had, like firewalls, for example, to protect our organization. They have value. It's just a matter of having the right tool for the right attack. And I work on cars quite a bit, and boy, I got to tell you, not having the right tool sometimes is a grind. So there are a couple of things that I want to talk about here, specifically when it comes to protecting our critical assets. We have environmental challenges all through different organizations, and basically we've accumulated all of these different tools over time, right? We've accumulated all these different types of software that sit out here. They may be stovepipe. You may have certain teams that own them, right? You may have a security team or a network team or an operations team that owns them. Also, as along with this technology sprawl, we've seen an increase in APIs. And unfortunately, not all the APIs are built differently. As a matter of fact, when you look at the OWASP top 10, APIs are solidly moving up in the OWASP top 10. We want to make sure that we've got eyes on them. So we want to make sure that the APIs are in place so that we can interact and communicate with other types of applications. But they need to be protected. They need to have solid authentication and encryption on the back end. If they don't, then our data is further at risk, right? And in order for us to have synergy between all of these tools and between sharing, between all these different teams, we need to make sure that those communications are done properly. And as you see here, this second bullet point that I've got listed here, when it comes to incident response pivots, I lived in this world for many, many years in the federal space. And part of our routine as a security team when we were dealing with transportation and large government entities, dealing with breaches or incidences, 2 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning, we'd have teams of 15, 20 individuals get on these phones. And our response is, we didn't have great tools like we're gonna see today with TrueFort, with the TrueFort platform. We didn't have the ability to have the visibility into our application space and see who was touching what processes were they executing, who are the users, what are the application, and are they supposed to be there, quite frankly. What we'd have to do is basically go back into firewall, back into router, switch, and host logs, and piece things together. And it's really incredible. One of the big selling points of TrueFort, and one of the reasons that I came to this company, was after watching the demo and having the experiences that I've had in operational security. It was like, oh my gosh, this used to take me and my team 4 days to a week and a half to find this information. Today, we can do that through alerting and reporting on the True4 platform in seconds. That's impressive. And, I saw the value right away. So this is a pretty amazing thing. Also want to relate back to the OWASP top 10, right? And, security misconfiguration is a big thing. And as we have more sprawl, we have different levels of software that are being managed by different teams. Misconfiguration is going to happen. And it is a top 10 issue that we continue to have. Every organization operates differently and is at risk. And that risk is the human element. Okay, so let's go on to the second. Internal resources can typically, they have great ideas. There are tools, like I mentioned before, tools are very intentionally and very specifically developed to help address specific security incidences, right? And approach and attacks. We want to make sure that we keep our eyes focused on this. Now, I've gone into several scenarios, especially in government and DoD, where we will build our own tool because the tool doesn't necessarily exist. And I've seen this over and over and over. The way that this typically plays out is, yes, for a short term, it will meet the requirement that we have. But the problem is this, and I've seen this so many times, or I walked into this situation so many times. When an organization develops, first of all, they're expending resources to do that. So they're going to be taking programming resources. They're going to be taking project management resources from that. They're going to be taking engineers and operational resources that need to be leveraged in order to create this. The bigger problem that we see, though, is that who's going to maintain this? Who's going to keep it alive? And then what happens when the applications that we're monitoring changes? Because guarantee you, you're not going to be able to set up some type of tool to collaborate between disparate security environments. And there's updates, there's security updates, there's patches. Guarantee you that you won't be able to maintain that same code during the entire process. There will be changes in libraries. And of course, one of the things we're not even talking about here, really, but is part of the insecure design as far as number 4 on the OWASP top 10. Part of that is the fact that libraries are increasingly more and more vulnerable. We have developers who are going out and actually procuring libraries from unknown sources, not vetting the code and doing a code review. And then boom, all of a sudden you've implemented this into your organization and it has a backdoor, or it's sending data out to a third party that you're not even aware of, right? And these are some of the use cases that True4 is specifically designed to not only identify, but to remediate. Okay, so let's go to the next one, security personnel. SOC analysts are busy people, very, very busy. They typically have a set number of resources that they're looking at, and a set number of applications or systems or a segment of a network that they're responsible for. It gets complicated and confusing when there's more than one dashboard to go to. And I don't know if you've ever walked through a really, really busy production SOC, but literally there can be 40, 50 screens up on a big wall monitor or on a big wall, and they're looking at their pieces that they're responsible for. This becomes it makes it hard for them to do their job well. And, I saw a very, very telling statistic about this at RSA. I believe it's 2 years ago or 3 years ago, where we were talking about the number of alerts that a SOC analyst actually deals with on a weekly basis. It's around 1,500. That's a busy SOC. The problem with that number is that analyst can only directly manage about 10 to 12% of that number. And I don't know about you, but that's meaning that 88, 90% of that data or those incidences are going unchecked. Very, very scary. They'll continue to cycle through, But what we need to do is to make sure that we actually have secure logging and monitoring so that we can identify the specific failures. That is efficiency in being able to identify and address security concerns in a security environment. And then finally, the application environment has changed, continues to change. Moore's Law is well into effect with application environments. We're seeing not only physical data centers, cloud-based, but also now container. So you may have Docker, you may have Kubernetes sitting out there. All of these environments have different approaches to how you secure them, how you manage them, and how you monitor them. So we need to make sure that, number one, we're able to do that, but also that in those disparate environments like Kubernetes, for example, that are unique, we want to make sure that we can actually evaluate and make sure that those components that are driving those applications are secure. Now we're going to jump real quick into a couple of things, right? So we want to basically, look at incidences and look at risk to organizations from an application perspective. And if you're not familiar with 800-207, that is specifically the zero trust framework for how we approach this, right? We want to make sure that our tools are aligned to zero trust. A lot of organizations are talking about this. They don't really understand or have a firm grasp of how we actually implement zero trust. And then you have all the vendors with all their marketing speak sitting out there. We do zero trust, blah, 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 right? I mean, I was at Black Hat a couple of years ago working the floor, and every single vendor on the floor was talking about this. You go up and challenge them or question them and ask them, well, what exactly do you do in this 800-207? And they're like, well, we provide zero trust. They can't answer you. They can't give you very specific questions. Whereas at Truefort, we have 4 specific and fundamental areas that we provide coverage with when it comes to zero trust. And we'll go over that as we push through. What this all comes down to really is understanding how the information flows within your organization. And I mentioned earlier that not all organizations operate in the same security policy mandates. In some organizations, it's completely fine internally to use unencrypted technologies like FTP or Telnet for certain things. In other organizations, we put hot glue in the USB ports, right? You're not bringing anything in. You're not doing anything to those systems. You can't touch them without going through a change review, right? So we want to make sure that we pay attention to how all of this works. Something that's unique about how Truefort actually approaches some of these problems is that we're actually going to help baseline what is expected behavior. So we're going to learn the environment, right? Before we enforce that, we're going to be using a machine learning algorithm on the back end, and it's a modified variation. And on the second bullet, what we're talking about here, the only platform that baselines and suggests enforcement policies, and this is exclusive of the network itself, right? We're also looking at service accounts. We're looking at processes. We're looking at commands that were executed. And the way that we actually develop those baselines is we're using a machine learning algorithm on the back end based on learning tree, but it's a modified variation that we actually pull in to get the metadata so that we understand and we can actually create a whitelist based not on what somebody else is saying you should be seeing, but what you are actually seeing. So this actually helps us create a highly accurate whitelisted model that operates as an exception in your application platform. One of the other things that we do, and this is our core capability in our third bullet, is we talk about being able to proactively control lateral movement. We profile the workloads. We use machine learning. That is an unsupervised algorithm. And then we also use a supervised element because we want to verify that what you're seeing is actually what you're expecting to see. And based on that, we create a positive security model, which means anything outside of what that profile knows to be expected behavior or communication, that's an exception. And that exception will, at a very minimum, alert. But if you're in an enforcement mode, it's going to actually prevent that. Once again, think of 0 days. This is going to prevent 0 days from coming in and doing, running unknown commands or pivoting east-west and having some form of lateral movement. This will prevent that from happening. So let's talk a little bit about what modern application environments look like, and who are the risks, who are the threat actors that are actually going out and trying to touch this data or basically get this data on the back end. And what you see in this slide is all your apps are in the center, right? And they're represented by the 3 tiers. So that's cloud to ground. So physical data centers, virtual, whether that be VMware, whether that be, Kates, whatever. If it's cloud-based as well, if it's a cloud-based like, E3 instance sitting out in Amazon, right? You have all these applications that are out there. They contain your data. They contain your customer order history, for example, or their private information, perhaps. And that's a value. That's not only a value to bad guys that are outside of your organization and your area of business, but it's also valuable to others. Let's talk about high risk, intelligence organizations in China. Let's talk about Korea, that want to look at your PII or want to look at your products, and they want to duplicate that, right? So we have supply chain attacks that could be coming from nation state, that could be coming from others outside of the organization that want to disrupt your business. APT is definitely a nation state driven type of activity. Living off the land attacks. I mean, this is something that, especially as we get further and further into cloud, this becomes more of a normalized threat to application space, especially when you're looking at cloud native services. And then compromised credentials. Real quick story on this. I mean, I was actually dealing with a large state agency in Pennsylvania. They had an insider threat risk because they had hired contractors to come in, and they were actually actively administering their networks. And some of those contractors apparently were there under other pretenses. What they did was they basically took the entire user list sitting here for all of their Active Directory users and computers. And what they were able to do is do a slow roll cloud-based attack from Amazon and other cloud providers over the course of about a year. It was so good and it was so compelling that the organization had no idea that they were being attacked. The reason they didn't know they were being attacked is because the threat actor that was a contractor that knew their security protocols, they knew their security control policies. So what they would do is they would spin up a virtual system. They would use it to attack all of their list 2 times from one IP. Then they would rotate to a new system. They did this over the course of a year. And the result of that attack was that out of 110 users that they had that were privileged, this is all of networking, security operations, and so forth, they had 35 of those accounts that were compromised. And they had actually done a slow roll brute force attack against those accounts. Never triggered an alarm because there were no patterns outside of that the operations team were looking for. Nothing was alerting, nothing was triggering internally. So what I'm saying here is that these types of events matter. even when they're off radar, because things are happening on the back end that you may not be aware of. And of course, ransomware, I kind of put like ransomware and lateral movement attacks. I pull them together a lot. Now, if I've got a threat actor, like an inside threat that's moving laterally, we saw that in NASA 2014 and 15, almost 20 months they lived inside of their network. And this is both inside as well as external attacks that were occurring. We've also seen nation state attacks occur against other organizations and move laterally. But ransomware is the epitome of it if you think about it. You think of WannaCry, crypto malware, a user is compromised. The first thing it wants to do is replicate, right? 445, it's going to be outbound looking at everything. So you want to make sure that not only do you have eyes on it, but, in the case of TrueFort here, we would not be allowing from a host accessing an application or from an application server a pivot to other resources on port 445, because that is not part of how the application works, right? We want to look explicitly at how it works. We will shut those types of attacks down. And at the end of the day, data exfiltration is the name of the game. That's where we want to go with this. So these are the four fundamental cores that the TrueFort platform actually addresses when it comes to zero trust. And the continuous verification is we are always on, right? We're always observing, we're always learning, we're always adjusting. When I get into the demo, what you're going to see as part of the policy and profile is that we have two sets. We actually have a current that is a living, breathing variation of the profile, and then we have a deployed profile, which is the actual profile that's being enforced. We want to be aware of both of those, continuously evolving and changing. We need to be able to see things that are going on in the environment. You can't fix what you can't see. And that's part of that verification, but that's also very, very true about visibility and analytics. When it comes to visibility, what you're literally going to see in the demo is you're going to see an external host, an internal host, connecting to applications. Why is that important? I want you to think about, should a user be accessing a database server directly? Or should they be accessing a web server or an application server? Is that more appropriate? So, when you ask yourself questions like that, clearly the user should not be directly accessing data from a database. Yet we know that attackers are going to, explore internally. They're going to pivot. They're going to look for ways to get into other resources. They're going to try direct and indirect attacks. And being able to visually see what's going on here greatly reduces the response time and understanding of exactly what's going on. But what's really, really cool about this is not only just the real time. So we look at continuous, right? But not only just the real time, but also being able to go back in time. And so we see something that pops up on a monitor, an alert that pops up that something happened 6 hours ago. We can literally walk back in those 6 hours and observe the process ID of the host, the user, the command, and the host that it's actually pushing through. So am I trying to do an SCP command, for example, to another host? Am I allowed to do that? Maybe I do have privileges to do that. Should I be doing it? Not part of the profile. Let's take a look at it. So once again, being able to see what is happening in the environment is incredibly important because you can't fix what you can't see. The next tenet that we're going to look at is limiting the blast radius. And what that is really is that's the core of microsegmentation. That is limiting that east-west flow. So I'm going to use an example here. Everyone's familiar with the SolarWinds attack. And that was a supply chain attack that happened at the vendor's, when the vendor was actually modifying and putting out updates of the SolarWinds platform. And What happened was that there was a compromise on the back end, and an external command and control server was put in place for all that data. So all that data was being sent to SolarWinds core servers, but it was also being sent to an external server. So in the case that you have TrueFort implemented and you've trained it, you trust the sources, you've gone through your unsupervised and your supervised learning processes, and now you're going into enforcement. When that change occurred, two things would have happened. When you implemented that supply chain attack, when you made those updates, two things would have happened. You would have received a alert. You would have seen a visual indicator, an orange line saying, hey, this should not be happening. This is not expected in our profile. But more importantly, if you trusted that profile for enforcement, it would have prevented that communication. And it would have prevented the loss of containment of data in your organization. So that's an example of a 0-day and how it was handled by the TrueFort platform. So just keep that in mind. I mean, not only are we covering, network, like I said, but we're also looking at user information. We're looking at the applications and the devices and the actual services that are being executed within a zero trust framework. And then finally, automating and controlling the data that we're collecting, and how do we respond to that? A huge advantage and differentiator for the TrueFort platform is we don't require that you have a SIM or a SOAR or any other type of third-party security control in order to get valuable reporting. So we can actually see all of this reporting information within the TrueFort platform because we incorporate an elk stack as our reporting mechanism. So not only will you see this, and I'll show this to you during the demo, but very, very comprehensive and very, very quick access to weeks, months, and even up to a year of data that you need to evaluate. And here I'm going to build out. This is a build out of how we work, okay? And what I'm going to talk about here is the way that the TrueFort platform works is this way. So we can actually take a third-party agent, right? And once again, we're cloud to ground. So we're the physical data center, cloud, virtual environments. Those application stacks that we're looking at, or those endpoints, may have SentinelOne, they may have CrowdStrike, or you may have Armis in your environment. Those agents will all report up to the TrueFort platform. So you do not have to add any additional agents in order to see the metadata from those endpoints. We will build out the application access model based on that. Now, there are other options as well. We do have a proxy, which we can pull in, disparate data from non-agent or agentless types of applications sitting on a network segment. And then we can also include the TrueFort agent. We have traditionally covered gaps in coverage where they may occur with other third-party agents. For example, older operating systems like Windows 2003, 2008, Solaris, or AIX. You can actually cover it with the TrueFort agent. This is a very, very lightweight agent. The big advantage to the TrueFort agent currently is that we can also provide file integrity monitoring and CIS benchmarking on top of the microsegmentation security controls that we're already seeing, right? We do add that. And we are routinely used in conjunction with CrowdStrike and SentinelOne as an example in the application stacks, so that we can provide about 100 additional points of metadata, and we have a more real-time depth and balance within the application stack. We can see what's going on here. So let's talk about observability. We're going to actually create a application mapping. We'll do this based on a CMDB or a spreadsheet, something we need to be able to define applications and hosts that are associated with that. Then at that point, we can actually provide some type of real-time query within. So we can actually go back out and learn or make observations about the environment. Once we have the mapping in place, we'll actually start learning when hosts are brought up that may be part of that. So literally, we're connecting the dots for you within this. Once that happens, we actually implement behavior analytics. That is based on the learning tree algorithm. This is the machine learning analytical code that we're talking about, unsupervised. It's actually creating that whitelisted policy. And then finally, the application environment, we want to make sure that we validate that. So that is part of supervised learning. We're going to validate that what we learned here in behavior analytics is indeed what is expected. That takes about 2 hours per application per week once we're getting stood up. Now, in Truefort's case, 14 to 21 days from the time we start the application until the time we should be in an enforcement role. Enforcement is actually going to allow us to enforce some type of action, whether that be alerting and monitoring, right? Or whether that be a response, an enforced response, which means I'm going to prevent communication of this host using this user in this port, right? It can be tightly controlled, or it can be very broadly controlled. And then finally, of course, we use the REST API on the back end. We can actually trigger workflows out to SIMs or SOARs, right? So that other workflows can be responded to. I've got 2 more slides I'll go through here, and then we'll be jumping into a demo. So let me jump into this. What does Truefort bring to the table? Why is it of value? And a couple of things pop out. First of all, we actually can expand existing value because we can reduce having to deploy new agents, for example. We can leverage that existing CrowdStrike or SentinelOne environment. So you don't have to go out and deploy and maintain new agents, right? That's what we see a lot of. We see a lot of value in. Also, we're going to be able to map these applications and user interactions. Once again, visually indicating this is going to provide much more clarity for you. And then finally, we will execute a control. So we're going to move from discovering and understanding, baselining, reviewing. Then we'll alert and refine what we're seeing in this. And then finally, we will execute and enforce. Now, the big thing with Truefort platform is that the vast majority of our customers actually deploy enforcement. They don't sit in alert and refine for months or years because they can trust the whitelist. Whereas if it were a blacklist or a signature-based approach, you're going to have a lot of false negatives and you're going to be dealing with dumpster fires. And then this is the final slide before we jump into a demo. But I wanted to talk a little bit about how we cover where Gartner is recognizing that we're actually providing value in the application and cloud workload sector. And you can see that we actually provide in the bottom, in the largest 6 tiers of this pyramid. We are actually covering the EDR portion, the exploit prevention, application control, and whitelisting. We are controlling the base of business critical application communication. And that's being recognized by Gartner. So we want to make sure that we're talking about that at the end of the day. We don't fall back on arbitrary management. We don't fall back on log management as a principal approach to security. So we want to make sure that we call that out. And I'm going to go ahead. We're going to go ahead and jump into a demo here real quick as well. All right, let's jump into a demo. I'm very happy to show you our platform, show you what we're seeing, what we can do. And we're going to start off with what we call the realm view. And here in the realm view, what you're literally seeing is you're seeing applications or nodes. We call them unregistered nodes. They are not required to have an agent in order to be controlled or interacted with the application stacks that we have here in the middle. So unlike other vendors in this space, we only require that the application stack that we care about, the crown jewels, they're the ones who have the agent. It could be EDR or CrowdStrike. It could be SentinelOne or our TrueFort agent sitting out here. Not only that, but we can actually segment this into different areas. So if I look at this view, I can go back and look at common services. So we can see we have SolarWinds, we have Veeam Backup, Rapid7, Active Directory, CyberArk, for example, manufacturing, right? We have different types of applications. So if I go here and I want to see more details on the application itself, let's go in here. And what you're actually looking at is you're looking at an application for the historian application. And we're seeing the web server and the database. Now, this is an administrative user coming in and doing some work on the actual databases themselves. And we can see that that's allowed. That's allowed by policy. The reason we know that that's allowed is because we have these green lines here, which means that it's in policy, in the whitelist, and it's expected behavior. Now, where we've seen other types of activity here, like on these PLCS drivers that are sitting out here. These are black boxes sitting out in the manufacturing environment. They have not been accepted as part of a normal use policy yet, which doesn't mean that it's bad. It just means that we have not accepted it at this point. The green lines indicate things that have been approved. So when we talked about the supervised approval of those policies, that's what we're talking about. We're going to go back here to the realm, because in this demo, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you, I'm going to look at my default view here. A little bit easier, less lines, all this. We want to look at a couple of things, right? We want to look at those unregistered nodes coming in and actually talking to the content information management application. But also on the left-hand side, I want you to notice other applications here. Those are ancillary applications that are not part of a definition for these apps. It may be third-party services, Active Directory authentication, or other websites for lookups or databases internally. But if I want to go into this and look more in depth at the application details, I can do so here, right? And two things I can do from this specific screen. I see it visually indicated that we have mostly approved communication. However, if I wanted to get into more detail and look at the grid view, I can see exactly what's going on here. Is it in policy? That's what this compliance check is. What is the direction? Where is it going? And I'm going to drop this out a little bit more. Who is the foreign host? Who is the source host? Source, destination, ports. We're looking at all the network information. We're also, if we have specific labels associated with this, and by the way, you can create your own customized labels for this. So this is not something that you're held to a set of 6 or 8 labels for. You're also going to see the users that are observed interacting and the commands that are being executed, obviously with the time and date stamp as well in the back end. Drop this back out. I'm going to go to graph. And then also, if we wanted to see additional detail here, we'll go into the alerts tab. I'll bring up the alerts down here. We can see a couple here that are critical processed and critical open. What critical processed means is that the platform took action on this alert. So not only was there a defined response to this, but it actually executed this, and the proof is in this. So if we go in and look at the annotation assigned here, we can actually see that on 2:43 and 28 seconds, and this is the TrueFort agent, I'll tell you how I know in a second, we actually observed that a system was not outside of normal workflow expectations. And the response to that was to apply an IP to IP workflow block. So it actually blocked that communication from occurring, right? The reason that I knew that it was a TrueFort agent is, look at the timing. This took less than 1 second from the time it was observed to the time that it enforced the block, less than 1 second. This is a real-time block that has occurred, right? In the case of SentinelOne or CrowdStrike, there's a slight delay because what's going to happen is they're cloud-based. They're going to be uploading the information to a bucket, and then redirecting that information back in. So there can be a 1 minute or 3 minute delay in that information. That's initial response. This is not problematic in a production environment, and this is the reason why. Once we observe the behavior, once the policy has been enforced, the information is pushed out to the endpoint firewall, whether that be IP tables, whether that be Defender, whether that be the CrowdStrike firewall or SentinelOne firewall. Whatever firewall they're using, we're going to push that out there, and we're going to be enforcing that specific rule. So let me drop this down here real quick. I want to show you something that's very interesting. We talked about being able to go back in time. You see this current view here. If I were to right-click here and go to Process, I can see a lot of things are going on in this process. And I can click right here, and I'm going to have to go down. I apologize for bringing the resolution down, but what we're looking at is a process that was not part of the profile. We see a process ID, a user, and then a command. That can just as easily be a SCP command trying to copy between hosts. If I wanted to pause this and I wanted to go back in and look for a specific period, let's say based on this application here. Let's say if we went into September 11th at 2:43 and 28, we can go to slider. We can actually go down to 2. Now that's going to be 2, not that time. And then we'll go to, what was it? 43. So let's go here, 43. Now this could be off a minute or so. Typically it's right on, but it has to be calibrated to the system. We see in this case it's off because it rounds up to the nearest minute. But we can actually see that we had an interaction here with Crony, and it actually was reaching out through linode.org. So we can see that this has occurred. But the point here is that you can walk back and you can look and see what processes IDs were being executed by what users within your organization, what other hosts they were interacting with. Very, very powerful when it comes to being able to control and observe the environments. Now, for this portion, I want to show you the profile. We're going to go into the SIMS application, Content Information Management. We're going to look at the web server in this case, and we'll look and see which agent we're using, and we can see that we're actually using, in this case, the web server role for this, and we're using a TrueFort agent in this case. If we look at the profile, and I'm going to drop this over a little bit to give you a little more space to look at this information with, we can actually see the policy itself. This is the whitelisted profile that was learned. So it actually observed this behavior and recorded the response to this behavior. I can go back out here and modify directly. This is a cron type of timing style. So this is occurring every second. We see a specific whitelisted policy. It's expecting incoming traffic to this host. The user that it's observed is root. The command that it's executing, in this case as an SSHD privileged command, it was encrypted, so we did not see it in this case. And we're looking at TCP in 22. We're also looking at a foreign host. So this is something that we've accepted as normal or expected behavior, right? I can just as easily disable this rule at this point. I can also just turn it off here if I wanted to disable that, right? And if I redeploy this, then that will now be an exclusion to the policy in this case. And in this case, we're looking at network, but I want to point this out. Within the profile itself, we have a number of different metadata parameters that we can look at. And like I said, if you're using the TrueFort agent, we can also go back and look at file integrity as well as CIS benchmarking. Process capability is huge with us. We can actually identify a process that's running with a user group or a specific user, and if they're not supposed to be running that, or they've changed permissions to run this, we can prevent that or stop the process entirely from running. This is both from a system CTL and a Windows process level. So just a little heads up on that as well. Remember we talked about recent drafts and deployed. You'll see here deployed is slightly grayed out, but we're always living in recent drafts. And the reason is because we have modifications, you're going to see things like this. It's going to gray it out. It's going to be in orange. What that means is that the administrator needs to review that and to approve before they deploy the rules. And if I were to show you this policy detail, what you're seeing here, this looks an awful lot like a firewall rule set. The reason is because that's exactly what it is. So this is what is going to be sent out to the EDR firewall or to the host firewall using a True-Fort agent, so that it will know it accepts this in a whitelist. Anything outside of the exception is referred back to the default rule, which by default is block. Now, let's say you made a change that you did not want to have happen. It's Q4. We can actually roll this back very, very quickly. This will roll back all policies within that scope. When we talked about enforcement, this is actually how we enforce the policy rules here. So I have an IP to IP block. If I were to go out and edit this, I can see that for this case, it's under a network rule set. It's IP, and I can choose some behavior. No workflow means monitor only. IP to IP is going to be the default, or we can specify port as well. That is going to enforce microsegmentation. That one configuration alone enforces microsegmentation, and it can be very, very tightly controlled. One last thing I want to show you is the reporter. So using the LStack, we can actually slice and dice through information very, very quickly. I love this report specifically. This is the risk posture report. So we look at things like FTP and any type of HTTP, unencrypted connections, port 80 out there, telnet, right? And we're seeing also like risky behaviors, production to pre-production or pre-production to prod. Are they sharing information? We want to make sure that we have eyes on this and we're able to very, very quickly parse through that information. And then finally, service accounts. So if I wanted to look and see what service accounts or what users were accessing or interacting with which applications, I can very, very quickly drill through this information and filter based on the information I want to see. In this case, we're looking at the last 24 hours, but we could literally go back to the last year if we had enough disk space sitting out there. So we see service IS user actually integrate or using multiple applications and in multiple application roles. Down here, we can also see that they have some outbound behavior going on as well from multiple servers. So if I wanted to see everything that was port 22 related, because why is service IS user actually reaching outside of the organization and who's it talking to? So within a couple of seconds, we've been able to drill down this data for this specific user on this port, and we can identify all of these hosts and all of these commands that have been executed. So that's pretty much the demo, and I wanted to entertain any questions or comments as we wrap up here. But I thank you very much for attending today, and I look forward to working with you in the future.
All right, great. So really nice demo there, Samuel. Love all the detail. So we've just got a few minutes left here. Are you ready for sort of a lightning round of questions?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, let's do it. So first one here, will I need to deploy an agent or network device?
Yeah, so we can look at this in a couple of ways, right? So if you already have an EDR like Falcon sitting out there, CrowdStrike Falcon or SentinelOne, no, you will not. However, an agent or some type of proxy will be required to pull that information back in. So we want to make sure that we can get that metadata into the platform from some type of entry point or agent.
Okay. All right, great. Next one here, can TrueFort integrate with other existing tools in my environment?
Yes, we actually leverage the REST API, but we also have something called custom pipelines, and we integrate directly with other types of SIMs and security controls. Specifically, SORF is a prime example of where we integrate very tightly. And change management systems. So you can literally create a comprehensive change and then control response system.
Okay. All right, great. Next one here, they're saying our company has too many tools, which creates alert fatigue with little to no focus on application context. Can you quickly cover again how you address that?
Yes, absolutely. That's a great question, by the way. So that's where actually TrueFort excels, right? We bring teams together to collaborate. The way that we do this is we correlate and we duplicate the pertinent trusted communications among the host, especially the ones that represent expected communications and interactions with all the application stacks. And it's a combination of real-time visibility and historical data. So a couple of things. So security operations, for example, can leverage things like the DVR capability to walk back in time, or they can use the reporting model to actually drill down and do a deep dive into data. This helps us reduce alert fatigue and eyes on glass complexity. Like I mentioned during the talk, SOC analysts are hitting 5 to 10 screens at a time. We want to bring that down to one, maybe two.
Gotcha. Okay. Next one here, I have a hybrid environment and utilize multiple clouds and data centers. Can TrueFort accommodate this?
Yes. So we are a true cloud to ground solution, and we can operate in multiple disparate environments simultaneously. And we provide a hybrid, what I call a visual bridge. So we're actually seeing the communication on both environments simultaneously, while inclusively or exclusively enforcing that lateral movement control between those environments. So yes, we absolutely can.
Okay, excellent. Next one, how long does it take to discover the different application and communications in my environment?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we're going to need to build out the application environment to begin with a spreadsheet or CMDB. That ensures that we have a proper match with the host and the application functions. It's that trust but verify thing, right? We want to make sure that what we're seeing is correct. And this happens in real time. And typically, to build a fully functional model is between 14 and 21 days.
14 and 21 minutes?
21 days, 14 to 21 days.
Okay. That sounds more
Right,
reasonable.
right.
Wow. Okay.
I know that. Yeah, that would be great.
Another timing question here. How long does it take to complete a microsegmentation project?
Like I said, to be fully trustworthy, if you want a learning, we're up and moving seven to 14. If you want full enforcement of the application stacks, we're going to take about 21 days to do that. There are exceptions, however, where you have semi-annual processes or you have quarterly processes. They either need to be manually included or you need to accommodate them as the processes come into play.
Gotcha. Makes sense. Okay. And one more here. What are the optimal approaches that TrueFort recommends for zero trust microsegmentation?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I touched on zero trust a little bit, specifically in 800.207, and how it relates to the cybersecurity framework. But the four tenets that we provide for zero trust and how we implement that portion of microsegmentation: visibility, being able to continuously verify, and then automation and contextual response, making sure that we can automate those processes. That's part of the pipeline or part of REST. And then finally, executing microsegmentation. That is called limiting the blast radius, and that's at the core of our capabilities.
Okay. All right. Well, Samuel, you did a great job of in this lightning round here of getting through as many questions as possible in the time we had remaining. Really appreciate it. Just one last question for you. If somebody wants to get started with TrueFort or find out more, what do you recommend?
Absolutely. So reach out into our site, check out the place. There is an inquiry button on truefort.com. Or you have my contact information. Please reach out and hit me directly. Look me up on LinkedIn. I'm out there. Like I said, I'm a security advocate. I love what I do. I've been doing this for a long time. And I'd love to have a personal relationship and help answer your questions and help you get started.
All right. Excellent. Well, Samuel, thanks so much. Really informative presentation, great demo, and lots of insights in the Q&A here. Really appreciate your time today.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right. And finally, it is time for our Amazon gift card prize drawing. And the winner of the $250 Amazon gift card is Justin Ellenwood from Michigan. So congratulations to Justin Ellenwood. We'll be in touch to get you your card. And with that, on behalf of the Actual Tech Media team, I want to thank TrueFort for making this event possible. And thanks as always for attending and for your great questions. That concludes today's event. Have a great rest of your day.